How to install Android on a Raspberry Pi. Although there are so many operating systems available for the Raspberry Pi, you might prefer to stick with one based on Linux. But what about the lack of touchscreen support? Perhaps the best solution is to install Android on Raspberry Pi. But how well does it work? And is there a significant difference from its mobile version? Let's find out. Linux is widely available for the Raspberry Pi. From the Raspbian Stretch distribution released by the Raspberry Pi Foundation, to Arch Linux, versions of Ubuntu, and more, it's the mainstream choice. The lightweight Raspberry Pi operating systems. Need to squeeze some extra processing power out of your Raspberry Pi? You should try a lightweight operating system. These examples will get you started. So why choose Android for your Raspberry Pi? Well, there's the touchscreen factor. For starters, none of the other Raspberry Pi operating systems have these. Save those running other software on top, such as Kodi. Then there's the choice of apps. While Android for Raspberry Pi isn't 100% stable, it is nevertheless capable of offering a vast selection of apps and games for you to use and play with. Online RPGs, handy utilities, Office tools, Microsoft Office, for instance, and much more are available. Fancy building your own tablet? Here's how to build an Android tablet for under $100 with a Raspberry Pi and touchscreen display. You also must download the Android image for the Raspberry Pi 3. Finally, you'll need the Etcher software, used for writing disk images to flash storage. This is available for Windows, macOS, and Linux in 32-bit and 64-bit versions. Download Android for Raspberry Pi 3, this is our preferred version. Although as you'll see below, other projects are available. With all your files downloaded, start by installing Etcher on your computer. Next, insert the micro SD card into your card reader. Also, ensure you've unzipped the Android image file and have it ready to use. Launch Etcher. If you haven't used this tool before, you'll see it is far simpler than any alternatives. Etcher features a 3-step process. It's as simple as that. Etcher will reformat your SD card. 2. So there's no need to worry about doing this first. The app should detect your micro SD card automatically. If not, click Select Drive, or change if the wrong device is selected, and browse to it. Finally, click Flash to begin writing to your micro SD card. Wait while the process completes. Then close Etcher and safely remove the micro SD card. You can then insert the card in your powered-off Raspberry Pi 3. Connect a display and input device, keyboard, mouse, touchpad, or touchscreen. Then boot it up. When you switch on your Raspberry Pi, Android will boot. The experience may be a little sluggish at first. You can expect an initially slow boot while the system configures. After a few minutes, ours took 90 seconds. However, you should notice normal performance. From here, you can access the usual default Android apps and get online as normal via the pull-down menu. If your Raspberry Pi 3 is connected to your network via Ethernet, this is already done. Otherwise, use Wi-Fi. At this point, the operating system is up, running, and usable. In many scenarios this might be enough. But what if you want to install apps? The only option is to sideload, importing Android APK files from external storage or a cloud drive. To do this, however, you'll first need to enable unknown sources in the Settings greater than Security menu. Find Settings by moving your mouse to the top right corner of the desktop. If you want to install an APK file from your cloud storage, open the storage in the browser and download the APK file. Once downloaded, drag down the notification bar from the top of the screen, and select the APK file to install it. Check the permissions, then install. It's not as simple as having access to Google Play, but it's good enough. If you want access to a store environment, use a Google Play alternative. Don't want to use the Google Play Store, or don't have access to it? Here are the best alternative app stores for Android. While we've looked at a project that utilizes a specific Android 7.1 build, others are available. These include Emteria OS, perhaps the most well-known implementation of Android on Raspberry Pi. Emteria OS is available free or as a premium product, around $21. The free option stops working every 8 hours and displays a watermark. LineageOS 15.1 based on Android 8.1, if you don't like the restrictions of Mteria OS. This version of Android is a strong alternative. Android Things, this version is a useful Internet of Things platform that runs on the Raspberry Pi 3 and later. While it's ideal for IoT projects, it's less suited for running games and apps. Selecting the right version of Android for your purposes will give you the best results. Take the time to try out all available versions to help make an informed decision. If the Raspberry Pi isn't working out for you as an Android device, remember that it's not the only single board computer available. Since the Pi launched in 2012, many competitor devices have come along, all offering compact computing with enough power to run a basic desktop or play HD movies. Here are the top single board computers we recommend. On the downside, not all of these solutions are as affordable as the Raspberry Pi. Its inherent cheapness makes it the go-to solution for so many projects. After all, the Raspberry Pi Zero costs just a few dollars. The Raspberry Pi is no longer the only board in town. We cover some of our favorite competitors, and why you might want to buy one. Android works well, overall, but it could do with better support for the Raspberry Pi. Happily, there seems to be enthusiasm in providing a workable version of Android for the Pi. What Android apps might you use on the Raspberry Pi? Well, with a big screen TV connected, media-related apps are particularly promising. With video apps like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, and even Kodi, you could turn the Raspberry Pi into an Android TV box. Want to cut the cord and save money on TV? Build your own Android TV box. Here's how to install Android TV on a Raspberry Pi. Unfortunately, support for the Raspberry Pi from Android app developers is non-existent. As such, running apps and games is often a gamble. Despite the improved hardware stats of the Raspberry Pi 3. All in all, though, Android runs reasonably well on the Raspberry Pi, better than on some cheap tablets. Android is a great operating system, but perhaps it's not the right one for your Raspberry Pi. Looking for an alternative to Raspbian and Linux in general? Plenty of Raspberry Pi compatible operating systems don't use Linux. Looking for a Raspberry Pi OS but want to avoid Linux? Check this list of non-Linux Raspberry Pi operating systems for ideas. Can't afford a Chromebook? Looking for an alternative to Raspbian? Here's how to install a version of Chrome OS on your Raspberry Pi. Text source, makeuseof.com.